Donald Trump made a whole bunch of promises to a whole bunch of different people on the campaign trail. He said he was going to lower your egg prices. He said he was going to lower your gas prices. Hell, he said he would even slash your energy costs in half. Now, I knew he was full of crap, and so did many others, but unfortunately, there are many Americans that actually believed him. And now that he's in the White House, and now that they control the House, and they control the Senate, they are going to be the ones that are coming up with legislation that are actually going to hurt Americans. And we are actually going to be able to see what their true intentions are. You know, Republicans for years have been convincing people into voting against their own interests. And now that the House has come out with their proposed budget and Donald Trump has endorsed it, that is all laid completely bare. So we're going to go ahead and dig into this House budget proposal, and buckle up, everybody, because it is going to be a wild ride. We'll go ahead and start things off by looking at a quick breakdown of the Republican budget, and then we'll dig into some more of the details. And if you do appreciate the work I do, please do remember to subscribe.
So what the House approved yesterday is what, as you said, Trump likes to call one big, beautiful bill. It encompasses all of the things they're trying to get done. There are some various complicated parliamentary reasons why it actually needs to be in one big, beautiful bill, but whatever. So the signature piece of it, of course, are tax cuts, and I'll talk a bit more about those later, but up to $4.5 trillion of tax cuts over the next 10 years. And then spending increases, a few spending increases for their priorities. Judiciary and Homeland are both basically border-oriented spending. And then defense, which both parties, to a considerable degree, need to have spent more on them. So roughly $300 billion more spending. But then they're talking about cutting a lot of spending. And so the Energy Commerce Committee is tasked with cutting $880 billion worth of spending. It's expected that that could be heavily out of Medicaid, could represent about 10% of our Medicaid spending. And so they're very focused on spending on Medicaid.
So I just wanted to pause it right there for a second, because do you guys see a problem with this budget proposal? They're proposing all of these different cuts, including $4.5 trillion in tax cuts over the next 10 years, plus all of these other cuts that we're looking at. But they are not going to increase any of our tax receipts. So to any person, we should now start to realize that they're going to have to start cutting into many of the most popular programs in our country. One of the main ones that they are looking at is Medicaid. And as you can see here on this chart, they are looking to cut $880 billion from Medicaid. Medicaid is what provides health care to some of the most underprivileged people in our country. 1 in 5 Americans are on Medicaid. Almost half of the children in this country are on Medicaid. And during the campaign trail, Donald Trump said he wasn't going to touch Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Do you guys remember that? And even yesterday, or a couple days ago rather, when he was in that interview with Elon Musk, he made that exact same promise. But he just endorsed this House budget proposal.
Look, Social Security won't be touched. Other than if there's fraud or something, we're going to find it's going to be strengthened, but won't be touched. Medicare, Medicaid, none of that stuff is going to be touched. Nothing.
Clear as day, right? None of that stuff is going to be touched. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. This is what Trump does. This is what Republicans have been doing for quite some time. They promise and promise and promise that they're not going to touch all of these sacred programs. And then at the end of the day, they come through and they take a machete to as much as they possibly can. All while benefiting wealthy Americans in this country. I find it absolutely grotesque. Let's go ahead and move on to show how this might affect the deficits, and after we kind of run through the rest of this budget proposal here.
So this wasn't a campaign promise. This is stuff he said since he's been president, contradicting what the House is doing. So it's going to be a very interesting process on Medicaid, which is obviously a very sensitive subject. And by the way, programs like Medicaid, like food stamps that he's talking about cutting as much as 20%, the House talking about cutting as much as 20% of, red states actually get a disproportionate amount of this money. So it's going to be interesting to see how Congress people hear what they hear in their districts and what they say. Student loans, another big target, could cut about 10% out of student loans. And then there's another 500 billion of unspecified spending. 62 of it would be what's called oversight. Those are federal pensions. So he's talking about cutting, they're talking about cutting $50 billion out of federal pensions. But when you add all this up, the administration, which says it's going to reduce the deficit, actually has a plan to increase the deficit by $2.8 trillion over the next 10 years. And so if you look here, this is the same chart we just looked at. You add in these new deficit increases, and you can see that instead of even dropping for a couple of years, it doesn't drop at all, and it just goes up further and further.
So how many times have we heard Republicans ranting and raving about our deficit? How many times have they said that we need to get it under control and that the Democrats are terrible for the country because they explode our deficits? But then they propose this budget that is going to add, this is a conservative number, by the way, at least $2.8 trillion to our deficit, all while slashing programs that many Americans rely on. We're talking about Medicare. We're talking about federal pensions. We're talking about, what was the other things they mentioned there really quick? Student loans. It's going to be an absolute shit show for people on the lower end of the earning ladder, and it's going to be an absolute boom for the wealthy in our country. We're going to go over next the tax cuts and how those are actually going to impact everyday Americans. And you guys probably aren't going to be surprised, but they are going to help the wealthy the most.
And basically what they want to do, the central part of it is extending the tax cuts that were voted in 2017 that would expire at the end of this year. It was another bit of budget gimmickry, would expire at the end of this year absent a renewal. But those tax cuts are what we call highly regressive, meaning they favor the wealthy substantially over the less wealthy. So people in the lowest 20% of the economy would get a 0.6% increase in their after-tax wages under this plan, and people all the way up through the 80% below the top would get still 1.4% or less. When you get up here, the top 20%, the top 1%, you see the percent increase they get in their after-tax income. Let's turn that into dollars. If you're down here, you're going to get $1,000. You might get $1,900 if you're close to the top. The top quartile gets $9,000. The top 1% gets an average of $70,000. So these are, again, what we call highly regressive tax cuts. Generally, we like to see them favor people at the bottom, not at the top. These are the opposite.
And he is exactly right about that. When we think about tax cuts, we don't want all of the benefits going to the most wealthy individuals in our country. But that is exactly what this proposed budget does. You could see there that most of the benefit goes to the top 1%. That should not be okay with anyone. These are the people who have more money than they know what to do with. And if you think about it through a different way, if you think that you're doing well by getting an extra $130 back on your taxes or getting your taxes cut by $130 when you're at the low end of the earnings scale, you also have to think about all of the cuts that they made to make that happen. This is what I would call a head fake. They're cutting a whole bunch of programs that low-income Americans rely on, and then saying, well, look, we're cutting your taxes. When in reality, that's not what they're doing at all. Because the tax cuts that you experience on the lower end of the income poll are going to be washed out by all of the cuts to all of the programs that these people rely on. This is what they have done over and over and over again in Donald Trump's first term. Arguably, the only major piece of legislation he was able to get passed was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And as we saw in that tax bill, 83%, I believe, went to the top 1% of Americans. This is the exact same thing. All of the benefits to this from this budget bill go to the wealthiest individuals in our country, all while Donald Trump was making all of these different promises to make sure that Americans, the average American's life, was going to be better. That's not to mention all of the different campaign promises that he made, like these ones.
The other challenge they're going to have, which is going to be a little bit fun if the stakes weren't so high, a little bit fun to watch, is that they've got this $4.5 trillion for tax cuts in this budget plan, as I said. Almost all of that will be consumed by extending these individual tax cuts that would otherwise expire. But during the campaign, the president ran around promising all kinds of other tax cuts. No tax on Social Security income. Restore the full deduction on state and local taxes. No tax on overtime. No tax on tips. Deduct in your taxes the cost of your auto loan. So he made all these promises. The whole thing adds up to about $7.8 trillion. So they're going to have to fit $7.8 trillion of promises into a box that's $4.5 trillion in size. And that's going to be an interesting push-pull between the administration and the Congress as well.
So in other words, the math just doesn't math. Donald Trump made all of these promises that there is no way he's going to be able to follow through on. And if we take this into account, this budget proposal, which, yes, it is in its baby stages right now, but if you take this into account and then you look at all of the slashing and burning that the DOJ department is doing, this is an assault on the poorest Americans in our country. The wealthy billionaires, people like Elon Musk, are trying to consolidate more wealth for the top 0.01% while slashing programs that low-income Americans rely on. They're just shameless. This is not going to help the average American. They're cutting all of the programs that low-income people need while trying to sell it as a tax cut for them. But like I said, once you don't have access to the programs that you relied on, like Medicaid and food stamps, that $130 you might be getting in a tax cut doesn't really mean a whole lot of shit anymore, does it? So we're definitely going to be keeping a close eye on this. This is a budget proposal that Donald Trump himself has endorsed. It just came out of House committee, I believe. So obviously it's going to go through the workings. They're going to have to debate a whole bunch of different things. It's definitely going to look different than this. But this is what Donald Trump endorsed. After making all the different campaign promises that he made, this is the budget that he wants to move forward with. Don't let these people continue to lie to you. They are trying to they're just trying to soak up as much wealth as possible for the top 0.01% while leaving regular Americans out to dry. So I will leave it there for now. If you guys got anything out of this video, please do remember to smash that like button and subscribe. Maybe share with a friend or two. I'd very much appreciate that. We've got to build something here on the left that can adequately push back against this right-wing media ecosystem that will just sing this budget bill's praises all day long without any pushback at all. So if you do appreciate my work, please do remember to subscribe. If you want to see how Donald Trump and Elon Musk's interview on Fox News was much weirder than you thought, go ahead and watch that video on the screen now. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on the next one.